Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Historical Geology 1404. I am your Viking host today, Stoic the Vast, and we will be having our lecture. Today we are having lecture 5, talking about the beginning of Module 2. Module 2 kind of leaves behind our review session we had in Module 1. I hope you took Exam 1. If you have not, then please come see me and we can talk about it. So Module 2 is all about the development of life, what life is, how it came about, and the different forms that it takes here on our planet now. Before I jump into the new stuff, though, I want to make sure I've got everyone's questions answered. Any questions for me today? No? Yes? Yeah, the test was due before class started. It is not closed because I chose for it to remain open because I am still missing a few. However, just know that it is past due. You absolutely need to take it still. Yeah, probably will, yeah. I gave you 2 days to do it. But it's better to, yes. Yes, of course. Okay, what? Yes, of course, yes. What? This is Stoic the Vast. I am the leader of the people of Berk in How to Train Your Dragon. All right. Huh? Stoic. You got to say it with an Irish brogue. Stoic the Vast. Huh? Oh, thank you. Alrighty. Although it's voiced by Gerard Butler, so it's less Irish and more Scottish. So Scottish brogue. All right. Yeah. It's what? Well, hey, I've been watching what I eat, okay? I wasn't going to pack on the pounds just for this costume, all right? I'm not getting paid to do it. Put in a pillow? I would have to walk around with a pillow in there all day. I don't want to do that. Yeah, beards move when you talk. Imagine that. Like that. Okay. Any questions about Module 1? The worst part is when I breathe in and the beard hairs or mustache hairs go into my mouth. That's actually a real life problem too. So the longest I've ever had my beard was about here. Yeah. A year and a half. A year and a half? Mm-hmm. Yep. I could probably grow something this long in about 6 or 7 years. Man, I'm so sick of that. You know what? No one is even able to tell me what it means. There are so many people who think it means so many different things.
And then some kid was like, it was at a baseball game or a basketball game, and they panned the camera to him and this kid was like, 6-7.
Yeah, but what does it mean? Exactly. There's no actual meaning behind it. It doesn't mean anything. All right. Last chance. Questions before we get started on new stuff. Your next exam is going to be in, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to have the review for it in 2 weeks. All right? So it should be week 6 that we have that, because we are in week 4 starting next week. Okay? All right. Good to keep going? Is anyone dressing up for Halloween tomorrow?
No, we're too old for that.
First of all, ouch. Second of all, lame.
I'm gonna be Bob.
Nice. Yeah, he's got a burger on his head. What are you dressing up as, Gavin?
I'm either gonna go with Magneto or
A clown? Ooh, sketchy. Ryan? Oh, like one of the basketball players?
No, no, no. Not space baseball. That it's that old like you know the old like TV show I think I don't know if it's I think it's a movie. It's Space Clowns or something. Oh, Killer Clowns from Outer Space.
Oh, I've never seen that. That sounds like a deep cut. Yeah, it's a deep cut movie. All right, over here. Anyone dressing up for Halloween? No? As what? Oh, yeah, Bob from Beetlejuice. All right, cool. I went to a Halloween party last night, and there was a little, he was like 3-year-old who was dressed up as Beetlejuice. He looked fantastic.
I thought he was like 7 feet tall.
Beetlejuice?
No, Bob.
Oh.
So Beetlejuice gotta be little. Because Bob's only 6'1".
I mean, as someone who's about 5'10", 6'1" is not something to scoff at. All right, here we go. So, let's talk about life. Life here on Earth developed from a common source, a common root. We will learn more about that over the course of the day, but this is something that we call a phylogenetic tree. Okay? You may have heard it described as a tree of life before. Have you ever heard that term, the tree of life? This is what that's referring to. Okay? Common source back here, and then different things spread off at different times and are related to each other in different ways. So for example, here we see bacteria split off first over here. Archaea split off very closely. Bacteria and archaea are closely related genetically. These little guys over here are mostly, they make up our planktons and our oceans, closely related, okay? Amoebas, which you've probably heard about. Fungi. What's a fungi? What's a very common? Mushrooms are a type of fungi. Look at this. Plants split off from this line before fungi did. You and I, we are more closely related to fungi than we are to plants. And fungi are more closely related to us than they are to plants. We're not made out of mushrooms, but genetically speaking, we share a lot more DNA with a mushroom than a mushroom does with a tree. Okay? So this is the sort of benefit, this is the sort of perspective we can see by looking at this on a phylogenetic level. The development of life through time, going from source to now. Okay, so yeah, here we are, fungi and animals, right next to each other. And trees are off on their own different branch, so to speak. Okay, so this gives you an idea of the diversity that life has taken through time. And these are only broad categories. We'll talk about most of these in deeper detail. All right, so where did life come from? There are a couple of actually really interesting theories on the subject. The one that you've probably heard discussed the most is the terrigenous origin of life. That is, life started here. How could that be? Well, Earth has all of the right chemicals and compounds and environments for inorganic substances to form together and make organic ones. That doesn't just happen, though. There has to be the right situation. So they did a series of experiments back in the 50s where they combined a whole bunch of chemicals together with an electric charge and were able to make organic compounds. Those organic compounds were basic amino acids. If you know what an amino acid is, those are the fundamental building blocks of DNA. Amino acids are required for DNA to form. DNA happens when amino acids make chains together. Those chains are proteins, and those proteins make those building blocks to our cells. All right, what do we got? Nice. Okay. That looks great. All right. Yeah, put you on the extra credit list. Way to dress up. All right. Where was I? Right. Okay. So what did Earth look like before we had life? Well, we kind of describe it as this kind of primordial soup. That's a term that you might see come up every now and then, all right? So we'd had 1 billion years or so already of volcanism and asteroid impact and the development of an early atmosphere and the development of an early ocean, but it looked nothing like the world we have now, okay? The oceans were probably super acidic, high in ammonia. Okay, the atmosphere, lots of carbon dioxide, lots of sulfur dioxide, lots of methane, lots of gases you really don't want to be breathing in right now. But all of these ingredients in the right situation, at the right temperatures, and with the introduction of an electric charge, easily given through lightning, for example, and you get the development of these amino acids. These amino acids start bonding together chemically. As they start to bond together chemically, those bonds start reacting to environments in different ways. These bonds start seeking out other atoms in this primordial soup. They are automatically drawn to them. I wouldn't say that any thought or instinct goes into this. It's chemistry at this point. The natural inclination for one bond to seek out another thing. And it keeps building onto itself, adding more to a chain. And eventually this chain becomes a whole complex chain. That complex chain starts behaving in more complex ways. And then those chains start building together. And eventually what happens is you get the development of your first single-celled organism. A collection of these chains that have a purpose. Seek out and find more stuff to build myself. Okay? So, this is the original Terrigenous Earth is where life started theory. Okay? Now, this gave rise to 2 different metabolic systems here on Earth. There's the chemosynthetic method and the photosynthetic method. Chemosynthesis, well, maybe actually we start with photosynthesis. Who can explain photosynthesis to me? Don't look.
It's like when the light comes down, right?
Light does what?
It goes into the plant.
Yes, it does. Yes, okay, good. It's giving that plant energy. Plants are the poster boy for photosynthesis, right? Whenever we think photosynthesis, we think about plants. They're essentially solar panels, if you think of it like that. They are absorbing the solar energy and using it to fill their needs. And their needs in this case are, I need energy. I got some hair in my mouth. I need energy, if I'm a plant, to break apart the molecules of carbon dioxide that I am pulling into myself from the atmosphere. I need to crack that apart. I need energy to do that. I'm going to get that from the sun. That is photosynthesis, okay? Using light, the energy from light, to break down the molecules you need to add mass to your body. Chemosynthesis came way before photosynthesis. Chemosynthesis is getting energy not from the sun, but from the actual separation of molecules itself. So a chemosynthetic organism is going to get the energy it needs to survive by bringing in molecules, by bringing in those chains of atoms, cracking them apart, and then capturing that energy for itself. It's going to initiate chemical reactions. And those chemical reactions are going to be, to some degree, exothermic, releasing energy, and that's how these things survive. Chemosynthetic organisms have been around on our planet for a lot longer than photosynthetic ones. It's actually quite fascinating. We still have a lot of chemosynthetic organisms on our planet. Can you think of a chemosynthetic organism? Can you think of any animals that ingest chemical components, break them apart, and then derive their energy from doing that? Yes? Oh yeah, we are, aren't we? When you think about it in that context, we are chemosynthetic. Okay? Now, the oldest chemosynthetic organisms are going to be bacteria. Okay? Those bacteria actually are still here, living at the bottom of the ocean, far from the sun. I'm talking about organisms that do not need the sun to live. Living at the bottom of the ocean next to those black smokers, okay, that are spitting out boiling water filled with dissolved metals. They absorb those metals, use them in their chemosynthetic processes to survive. No sun required. Now, this raises a very interesting question. If the sun, or at least presence on the surface of our planet, where the sun can influence you, can touch you, is not required for life to begin, then how do we know it began here? Because here's the issue. All of a sudden, if we don't need the conditions at Earth's surface for life, that opens a whole wide range of where life could be. Right? We talked about the Goldilocks zone in this class not long ago, right? That Goldilocks zone I mentioned was the ideal zone around a star in which a planet can reside and its water remains at a liquid state. Liquid water, theoretically, being required for the presence of life. Liquid water at the surface of a planet has to be between 0 and 100 degrees Celsius. Below 0 degrees Celsius, it freezes. Above 100 degrees Celsius, it boils, turns to steam. So between that is that Goldilocks zone. But just like I mentioned then, our understanding of that Goldilocks zone has been expanding outward because we now know about these things like chemosynthetic bacteria that don't need the sun in the first place. And therefore, the conditions they can survive in are much more broad. So if life didn't start here, what does that mean? Where would it have started? Somewhere else. This is the second theory about the origin of life. We call this panspermia. Okay? Panspermia means life started somewhere else in our galaxy and then came here. How would this have happened? Well, we have actually found organic components on pieces of rock not belonging to Earth. There are organic components on asteroids. There are organic components on other worlds here in our solar system. And if that's the case, why not somewhere else in the galaxy? So, under what circumstances would this have happened? When you look at the surface of Mars, for example, what do you see? It's covered in a whole bunch of craters. Each of those craters came from what? Asteroids, right? Or meteors, right? Any piece of debris that crashes into that planet. What if life started on Mars and then there was a big asteroid impact which blew a bunch of debris from Mars into space, and eventually one of those pieces of debris that contained bacteria came here. And that's how life here began. It'd be pretty crazy. Wouldn't that mean we're essentially relocated Martians? This is a very interesting discussion. And Mars is just one example. It could have come from a planet in a whole other star system that wandered through space for 500 million years before it came here. It's all possible because we now know that here on Earth there are bacteria that can survive the conditions of space and other harsh conditions. There are organisms here that do survive in space. Which means, theoretically, they could have got here through space from somewhere else. Very interesting debate. Now, those experiments I talked about in the 50s with generating those amino acids from inorganic components, this was called the Miller-Urey experiment. Okay? This was in 1952. Basically, they took a closed system with a whole bunch of glass bottles and interconnected tubes. They had methane and nitrogen and water, and they had, what else did they put in there? They put a few other gases in there, but they're all inorganic, okay? They had some inorganic components, and they heated it up just a little bit to excite the atoms, and then they introduced an electric charge. They just put an electric diode up against it. They passed an electric charge through one of the chambers. But you know what happened the minute that they did? They started making organic compounds. They made adenine, guanine, cytosine, thymine. Those are amino acids required for DNA. They started making amino acids in this chamber. All you need are inorganic building blocks and an electric charge, easily made through lightning. We see lightning in other worlds. It's easy. How do you make lightning? All you need is static electricity. Even a thin atmosphere can have lightning. Okay? So you have lightning plus these compounds, which are some of the most common compounds in space. Boom. You get amino acids. As a matter of fact, we can actually, by measuring wavelengths of light in space, we've been able to look out into space. There is so much of these ingredients out in space that some of these basic amino acids are forming in space. We can see clouds of some of these materials out there. Okay? So it turns out that the ingredients to start life as we know it, DNA-based life, amino acids, is much more common than we thought initially. Over the last 3 decades, we've learned a lot about this. All right? Especially since that experiment, but especially in the last 3 decades. Okay, so the last 80 years, but the last 30 years have made huge progresses. So life really could start in any number of places. There are a few places in our solar system that life could exist. Titan and Europa and Enceladus are 3 moons in our solar system. Okay, Titan and Europa are moons of Jupiter. They are both covered in ice. Originally, nobody thought anything could live there. But now that we understand the possibility of life existing and starting in other places, we've been taking a closer look at them. Turns out that while both planets, or excuse me, moons, I need to call them moons, is what they are covered in ice, beneath that ice is liquid water, kept liquid by a hot inner core. Same thing is true with Enceladus, but Enceladus is a moon of Saturn. So we have 2 moons of Jupiter and a moon of Saturn that have a crust, an outer crust of ice. Think of it as a solid atmosphere. And then a liquid layer of water that goes miles and miles and miles to the center of the moon. Think of that as the environment in which life could exist. It's entirely possible that life does exist beneath that hard, icy crust in the liquid water. Now, not long ago, we passed a satellite over Enceladus. That's the one, the moon of Saturn, okay? Enceladus is very interesting because it has what we call ice volcanism. Here on Earth, we have convection processes that bring hot rock to the surface. It melts, turns into magma. That magma gets spat out by a volcano where it cools off and adds to our crust, right? We're all familiar with that process. Well, guess what? Enceladus has a crust of ice, a mantle of liquid water, and convection apparently is a thing there because we see volcanoes on the surface of this ice moon spitting water out. They are ice volcanoes spitting liquid water out, just like our volcanoes here spit liquid rock out. Same physics, same concept, just a different material, water instead of rock. So as soon as that water makes it up into space, it instantly cools off, becomes ice particles, essentially snow. And our satellite picked up some samples of this as it sped past Enceladus. And you know what it found? Organic matter. There was organic matter in this ice that we picked up that was spat out of the middle of Enceladus. Now, whether or not that organic matter indicates the presence of life under the ice, or there's just the possibility for future life to develop, we don't know. But it's perfectly in line with the Miller-Urey experiments. Okay? Added to this, Europa has these weird lines across its surface. They kind of look red. What could make weird, random, crisscrossy red lines on a moon made out of ice? It might be life. It might be some variation on the red algae that we have here. Colonies of them at the surface. or near the surface. It could be waste from that life underneath the surface. We don't know. There's actually a mission to Europa that's being launched here in the next few years, specifically that's going to get close to the surface. I don't think they're planning to land, but I think that they're going to get close to the surface, close enough to get a look at what these red lines are, and then send that data back to us so we can figure it out. Exciting time to be alive. We're learning a lot more about life in our universe. Okay? So now that we've talked about some of the mystery of where life began, let's talk about what life is. If I were to ask you all what life is, what would you say? We are alive, but so you're saying we're alive, but nothing else is? Huh? Okay, so things that are made out of cells are alive? Let's be a little more broad than that.
Anything with atoms.
Anything with atoms? Is that table alive? Anything that's on the tree of life? That's kind of like saying anything on my cookie sheet is a cookie. Right? It's kind of working backwards from my conclusion here. Things are on the tree of life because they're alive. It's not things are alive because they are on the tree of life. You know? Ideas? What does it mean to be alive? Huh? A what? Breathing. Okay. Does something have to breathe to be alive? Okay, but what is life? What is it to live? What is the criteria for being alive? Having DNA? That's a really good point. Breathing was an interesting one. Yeah. Producing offspring. Ooh, interesting. Huh? They don't? Then how are there so many trees? Okay, very interesting points here. Let's talk about it. The general agreement for what it takes for something to be alive is something that is, it's going to catch up here in a second. Something that is self-replicating, so reproduces. It has to be able to pass on itself in some way. And self-regulating, so generating and managing its own energy, and like breathing, things like that. Okay, respiration. So, if these are the requirements, let's talk about how life today manifests those. Cells. Someone mentioned earlier cells. I think it was Ryan. Talked about cells. Cells do all of this. Our cells are constantly replicating and regulating. Cell division is a process of cell replication. So we can replicate on the macro level, in the case of our species, okay, through sexual activities, okay, we can have children and continue our species. At the cellular level, actually that's how it is for pretty much everything. At the cellular level, it's doing the same thing. How does your body remain in a state of health? Or how do you get healthy after you've gotten sick? Okay? Your body is constantly making new cells. Those new cells are replacing the old cells, maintaining your body. As time goes on, your body can't keep up with the slow decay of time. And therefore, you start losing the race with the amount of cells that you produce versus the number that die. You get old, and you in turn die in enough time, okay? It's not fun. Dying's not fun, right? Our cells are also regulating. They are holding and generating the energy needed for what they do. So inside of each one of your cells, there has to be something that's telling your cells what to do. What is the substance in your cells telling them what to do? Huh? Huh? The nucleus? No. There's something in the nucleus of your cell. Huh? It's DNA. DNA is the code in every cell that tells that cell what to do and when. Okay? DNA is individual to groups of animals or plants, and then species, and then you. Your DNA is not exactly like mine. Every single person in this room shares 99.99% of the DNA with me. Yes. We're in the same species. We have most of the same DNA. The only things that are different are the traits that we pick up through our different lineages in our species, which is why we don't look exactly the same. But you know what? If an alien came to our planet and looked at us, maybe they wouldn't even be able to tell us apart, because the things that really make us look different aren't that big. Okay? I share 98% of my DNA with a bat. Uh-huh. No. Although it feels like it these days. I share 60% of my DNA with a tree. I share 40-something% of my DNA with a bacteria. I'm rounding these numbers. Okay? I'm giving you an idea of what I'm talking about here. Our DNA, through time... Oh no, I'm losing my cape. Our DNA changes through time, and we will talk about that, how that happens here in a little bit. But as our DNA changes through time, we develop new, different forms of life. That's where the diversity for our life comes from. So DNA is required for us to be able to receive the instructions to our cells for what those cells need to do to maintain life, to self-replicate, to self-regulate. So, let me ask you this. Would a thing that exists without DNA, but still seems to self-replicate and still seems to regulate, would that be alive? Interesting philosophical question here. Yeah. This is about viruses. Are viruses alive, my friends? Why? Viruses are not made out of DNA. Viruses are RNA. So a DNA is a deoxyribonucleic acid. It is a double helix chain that contains distinct messages. It can not only transfer data, it can hold data. It's essentially a line of code, a memory stick that you have that controls the functions of your cells and therefore your entire body. RNA is more or less a message. It is a message code. It's an email. It's not a hard drive. It's just a one-way message. That message in the case of a virus is make more of me. The only thing a virus wants to do is take over cells and make more of itself. So that's what it does. And a virus is a code of RNA that will burrow its way into your cell through the cell wall and then start breaking apart the interior pieces of your cell and making more of itself. Until what's left is your cell gets ripped apart by all of the new viruses that were made inside of it. And then each one of those goes and tries to infect another cell. Well, you die or you don't. The bad viruses kill you because your body can't fight them. The mild ones make you sick. Maybe a sore throat, maybe a stuffy nose, maybe you're in a hospital for a month. Viruses replicate, but it's not through the passage of new genetic code. It is through the destruction of other genetic code and then copying itself. with the remains. Nor do they regulate. They require the energy of their host cell to function. They don't make their own energy. So, is a virus alive? My answer to that is no, because they do not contain any genetic code, and they also do not make their own energy or regulate their own energy. But also, the best comparison I can make to this is, you guys know what like an android is? Not the phone, but like a robot that looks like a person. Viruses are essentially the androids of the world, okay? They look like they should be alive, and they behave as if they are alive, but they are not really alive. They're robots versus biological organisms, okay? The development of viruses through time is actually fascinating. We can see viruses have been around for an extremely long time. Matter of fact, there are dinosaur bones that have clear viral infection histologies on them, okay? We can see that dinosaurs fought viruses, viral infections, as well as us. Okay, it's been around for a lot. And how did it begin? Don't even know. Maybe one day we'll find out. Viruses are a very interesting component to this discussion, though. Okay, so let's talk about fossils. How do we preserve life? How can we find evidence of life? Mostly through fossils. Fossilization is the process where biological remains are replaced by mineral remains, okay? Or minerals, not cells, crystals, okay? So crystalline structures or sediments can take the place of where previous biological remains were. It's very rare to preserve it down to the cellular level, but when it does happen, we love that. Okay, there's a name I'll show you about that here in a second. I think my cape fell off. I'll just take it off. Okay. Well, actually feels nicer. Okay, so most of the time, the vast majority of the time, it is only the hard parts of an organism that are preserved. Why do you suppose that is?
The hard part?
Yeah, the hard parts, the teeth.
Broken down.
Why?
As bad as like skin and muscles and stuff.
Why?
It's hard.
Okay, but that doesn't explain why.
Oh, because like whenever all the rocket stuff is getting put on top of it, it's like it's not breaking as easy as this other stuff.
So it's harder to break down is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Who would agree with this? Does anyone have an alternative opinion on the matter? Hard parts in organisms are more likely to be fossilized because they are more difficult to break down. Alternative hypothesis? No? Okay, well, that's essentially it. All right? Your hard parts of your body, your bones, your teeth, your fingernails, are already made from minerals. Okay? So the process of being fossilized, really all it does is lock it in, maybe put extra minerals in there. For soft tissues to be mineralized, like muscles and skin and hair and feathers, is an extremely rare circumstance. Okay? Because remember, what's happening is these soft parts, they are rotting, they are decaying, they're breaking down much faster than the hard parts will. So you have to have usually some very rapid replacement for that to happen. There are a couple of ways you can get replacement. I have seen fossils made entirely out of carbon. There's a lot of carbon in your rock. Carbon can replace the components. I've seen fossils replaced entirely by silica. So they're made out of quartz now. There are fossils entirely made out of iron. So they're iron oxides, right? So there's so many ways that, that this can happen. When we get soft-bodied organisms or soft tissues that are preserved, like feathers, like muscles, like skin, we call that a Lagerstätten. It's a German word. A Lagerstätten is when you have these soft-bodied fossils left behind, And boy, what a victory that is. We can get some really cool information off of that stuff. Seeing what dinosaur skin actually looked like is a huge win. Oh yeah, there are dinosaur skin imprints. There are feathers that we have found imprints of that dinosaurs had. Yeah, turns out that quite a few dinosaurs had feathers ever since the Jurassic. The dromaeosaurs, like Velociraptor, most likely had feathers. Even some tyrannosaurids had feathers. Very interesting. For those of you that don't know, yeah.
So I'm going to mention a childhood TV show, The Dinosaur Train. So is the dinosaurs in that one more accurate?
It's a good question. I've never seen The Dinosaur Train. I don't know how accurate they are.
It's on PBS Kids.
I don't even have time to watch Netflix. I don't watch PBS Kids. Sorry. It wasn't something that was going on when I was a kid, and I didn't even have TV when I was a kid. So keep your 1800s jokes to yourself. Okay. If you were to look at a dinosaur toy from the 1990s, none of them would have fossils, or none of them would have feathers, excuse me. But now you go and you buy a dinosaur toy, they've got feathers on them, especially the Tyrannosaurs and the Velociraptors and all of that. They've got feathers on them. Now, there's this little series called Jurassic Park that has really helped with how popular dinosaurs are. And people didn't generally pay too much attention to dinosaurs in society until Jurassic Park came out and captured everyone's imagination about it. This mustache is really starting to bug me. Yeah, Jurassic Park. But now we know that they had feathers. For those of you that did not know this, birds are actually a type of dinosaur. We often say dinosaurs went extinct. They didn't all go extinct. The birds stayed. Birds are avian dinosaurs left behind. They split off from the same group that velociraptors came from. They got smaller. They invested evolutionarily into the feathers and into flight, which is why they were able to survive the extinction while the dinosaurs did not. Birds were able to survive in two environments, air and ground. And that gave them an edge that the dinosaurs did not have. We'll talk more about that evolutionary relationship later on. Now, what about plants? Plants don't have horns. Plants don't have teeth. Plants don't have any of that. So how come we have fossilized plants? Well, plants have several different types of tissues, one of which is called cellulose. It's not cellulite, okay? Cellulite is the fatty tissue that we acquire as we drink, soda and eat high fructose corn syrup, which are things we can't process, and so our body stores it as fat. That's why we get fat build up in our bodies and why America and the world is starting to have a bad obesity epidemic, okay? Cellulose is a different type of tissue. It is hard, it is rigid, and it makes a sort of honeycomb cell structure inside of my plant. That is what provides plants that rigidity for them to stand up. Why don't plants just flop over? I mean, some do. Some flowers will flop over if they're not well supported, right? Tomato plants will flop over if they don't have something to grow on. Why don't trees flop over? Because they have more cellulose structure holding them up. Okay? So it is that cellulose that remains behind after a plant dies, and it is between the honeycomb structures of that cellulose that the minerals or grains to make my fossil are formed. Okay? Permineralization is a term that's applied to a way that this can happen. Okay? That's why we have fossil plants. Some other types of fossils. Molds and impressions. If I have a fossil in rock, there's going to be a positive and a negative of it. The positive is the mold. Okay? It's going to have the same shape and form of my original organism. Then, if I were to pull the other side of rock away from that, I'm going to end up with a negative, an impression of that mold. So I'll have a positive and I'll have a negative, both of which count as fossils, but only one of which is occupying the same space as the original. Trace fossils, we've mentioned this before, trace fossils are evidence of life without any actual pieces of the life to begin with. So footprints are a great example. Evidence, dinosaur stepped here, right? It's like that dinosaur carving his name in. I was here, but it's not actually him. It's evidence he was there. That is a trace fossil. Any questions so far? Many of them do. For a footprint to be preserved, it needs to have been formed and then dried out quickly and then covered in other sediment. That's how you preserve a footprint. Do any of you, were any of your moms super sentimental and kept like a cast of a footprint of when you were a baby or something like that? Yeah? Okay, well there you go. Yeah? So it's the same process with the footprints, right? You step in sand or in plaster, you dry that out, and then you have an imprint. Okay, it's just like that. That's exactly what the negative is as well. Okay, if I had Play-Doh in my hand right now and I poked my finger in it, my finger would be filling that hole. But if I removed my finger, it would leave a negative impression of itself there. That's what that negative is. That's what I'm talking about. Okay. The absence of the thing that was there before. All right, so let's talk about how life changes. I just told you a little bit about birds, okay? I'm taking off this thing. Wait, hold on. Should I leave the beard on? Oh, wow. Y'all are mean. All right. It's getting in my mouth. All right. How does life change? Life doesn't just change because it wants to. I mean, it can. If, Onik, if it got hot in here, what would you do? Like really hot. Take off the hoodie, right? If it got really cold in here, what would you all do? Put your jacket on. Clearly, we are capable of changing without evolution. You and I can make that choice for ourselves, right? But when I say life changing, I'm not talking about a simple choice. I'm talking about over time, okay? So, life changes because of changes to our DNA. This is a DNA strand. This is that double helix DNA. Each one of these different colors represents a different amino acid code, okay? A different protein that is storing information inside of this DNA. Trillions and trillions of lines of code that controls every aspect of the function of your body. Everything from the development of you in embryo in your mother's womb to now and how your body continues to grow. What color your hair is, your eyes, how quickly does your hair grow? Do you even have a pinky, right? All of these are things controlled in your DNA. When there are changes to your DNA, that manifests as changes to you. When there is a change to your DNA, we call this a mutation. What can cause mutations? Well, first up, most commonly, radiation. Remind me what radiation is, somebody. It's not an element. What is radiation? Radiation is the byproduct of atoms breaking apart. And what is radiation itself, though? You just told me how it's formed. What is it, though? It's definitely energy. Well done, but what is it? Like, actually, literally, what is radiation?
Electrons, protons, and neutrons.
Yes, it is. Electrons, protons, and neutrons blasting out from some source because they have been emanated as a result of decay or fission, right? Name a source of radiation.
Sun.
Not a source of radiation, but the sun is. The sun is the most common source of radiation that you and I deal with. When you and I absorb radiation, we get a sunburn. But what's that radiation doing to you at the cellular level? What is that sunburn? It is killing the outer layer of skin cells that your body has. That's why when you get a really bad sunburn, your skin peels off. Your body is getting rid of the dead cells. This radiation, though, it's going to do something other than just give you a sunburn. It penetrates you. It goes deep into your cells, a lot of it. The higher energy stuff will go through your skin and influence your other cells. This is what the most common source of mutation is, okay? When radiation from the sun goes through you and knocks one of those off. Maybe it's a loose neutron or a loose proton, but it's traveled through your cells and boop, it knocks something off one of your DNA codes. All of a sudden, my code has changed. My line of code is different. Instead of saying, grow Omar's hair curly, which, just as an example, okay? All of a sudden it says, grows Omar's hair pink. Not even the same sort of description. But you can't control that. It's random. And I really want to push this. I really want you guys to know this. Evolution is not a plan. There is nothing out there, as far as we are aware, scientifically speaking, that is dictating this change. It's all random. All the evidence we see points to it being random. It could have been anything, any change to Omar's hair. Omar's hair are now fingers, right? It's totally, that one's pretty far out there, but it's an example of how random this can be, okay? This is why you'll see people who have very odd physical alterations. My brother and his wife just 2 Fridays ago completed, 2 Fridays ago, completed the adoption process for the 2 boys that they have been fostering for the last several years. Yeah, we love these boys. They are wonderful little boys. They are 8 years old and 4 years old. And they're just the cutest little boys. We love them. We're so excited to have them as permanent parts of our family now. The youngest one, the 4-year-old, has 2 thumbs on his right hand. They're joined at the bottom joint. He's got 2 thumbs right there. How'd that happen? It's a mutation. It is a mutation that he experienced and is now part of his genetics. It's part of his DNA. Is that a positive mutation? Do you think that gives him any sort of advantage in the world? Well, no, because they can't move independently. They're at the same joint. They move at the same time. Do you think that this is a mutation that will benefit him in his life? No. And this is the next important concept here. We get a mutation. This mutation causes a change. That change is in an individual, and it will remain in that individual that the change occurred in until that individual propagates itself, reproduces. That is an opportunity for that trait to get passed on to the next generation. If my little new nephew reproduces and his line, his genetics gets passed on, his offspring have a chance of having that genetic alteration as well. But here's the kicker. In nature, this only happens if the trait is positive. If it gives an advantage, the individual will survive long enough to pass on its traits in the first place. Here's an example. A wolf is born with tiny, tiny teeth. And they stay tiny for the rest of its life. It experienced a mutation in its DNA, probably while it was developing in its mother's womb, or maybe its mother experienced this genetic change through mutation. And this wolf is born with tiny, tiny teeth. Not the big teeth of the other wolves. Positive or negative mutation? Why? It can't compete with the other wolves that have bigger teeth. It won't be able to fight as well to defend itself. It won't be able to hunt as well. What's going to happen to this wolf most likely? It's going to die. And therefore, what will happen to the offspring? They never happen. In nature, negative mutations almost never propagate. They never become inherited traits because the individuals that experience that mutation die as a result of how negative that mutation was. Now, most mutations don't matter. Maybe I have heterochromatic eyes, one eye color of one color. Maybe I got one blue and one green eye. That's not something that will influence your survival. How good your eyesight is, that will, though. I have terrible eyesight. I require contact lenses and glasses to survive, to see. Without those corrective tools, I would not survive in the natural world. If I had been born 600 years ago, I would be useless. Okay? Because I wouldn't be able to see anything practically. This is a concept I'll come back to later about how humanity has altered the way that nature works there. But positive and negative mutations are an important concept to understand. All right? Let me give you some examples here. This is the rock pocket mouse. Isn't he cute? Yeah, you're pretty cute. In New Mexico, where you find rock pocket mice, there are two different variations you can see. The first one lives in the desert and looks like this. The second one lives on a black basalt lava flow in the middle of that desert. And they look like that. They are the same species. What's the difference? The color of their hair. Why? Yes, sorry. Yeah, why do the tan-colored ones live in the desert and the black-colored ones live on the basalt? Do you think they naturally know, oh, I'm black-colored, I should live on the black-colored rock? No, they're mice. What happened here? Yeah. Yeah, sure. Their body's adapted to the environment. Was it intentional? No. Gavin? Oh, there it is. What happens if I am a rock pocket mouse with tan fur living on the black rock and a hawk passes overhead? I'm going to stand out like a sore thumb. Or if I'm a black mouse in the tan desert, I'm going to stand out like a sore thumb. Okay. So, this is what happened, my friends. At some point, a rock pocket mouse developed a mutation for darker fur. It was able to survive longer and more successfully on the darker colored rock than the rest of the rock pocket mice around it. That gave it an advantage. It was harder to see from predators. Because it had that advantage, it had a longer life, maybe it was able to breed for 10 years instead of the normal 5. That gene for darker fur got spread through more of the population. Eventually, more of the population in that basalt flow got the darker fur. Any rock pocket mouse that came to live on that flow that didn't have dark fur got eaten. Any dark-furred mouse that left the flow got eaten. Until now we have two populations of the same species, one with dark fur and one with light fur, that live on or off the basalt flow. This is an example of how a successful trait can change a population over time. All right, here's another one. This one actually comes with an interesting caveat. Man, this beard. It's even worse than a real beard. Okay, what about elephants? Do you know that elephants are endangered? Why are they endangered? People hunt them. Why do people hunt them? For their tusks. Poachers will kill them for their tusks and then just leave the bodies of the elephants. Oftentimes, they won't even finish the elephant off. They'll shoot the elephant, cut off the tusks, and then leave the elephant to die from an infection or any other potential way that it could die after having a piece of its body cut off. It's brutal. Okay? There is a reserve, I believe in Kenya, where decades ago, an elephant, a male elephant, was born without tusks. In a world without humans, what advantage does an elephant without tusks have? None. Elephants need their tusks. But what's the one big threat to elephants now? Poachers. So if I'm an elephant and I no longer have any tusks because I was born without them, in a world without humans, bad. In a world with humans, that are my biggest threat, advantage. Now there is a whole herd of elephants in Africa that have no tusks because this one elephant never got poached. He never got shot. So he's been able to propagate his lineage. He's been able to breed for years. And now he has a whole herd of tuskless elephants with him. And they will never get bothered by poachers. Only because humans exist and human greed wants that ivory is this a positive trait. And yet a positive trait it is. And this may be the future for how elephants survive us through this one evolutionary change, this one mutation. Interesting, is it not? Okay. All right, so let's talk about phylogenetic trees and how we can think about those a little bit better, okay? So it's very tempting to look at your tree of life. Imagine this is your tree of life with different branches off with the different forms of life here, just like we saw earlier. Very tempting to look at it and make a few misinterpretations. Yes, go for it. Phylogenetics is the study of evolutionary relationships. How closely related is this thing to this thing, and where do they meet? Where is their common ancestor? Okay? This is what we call nested hierarchies, where the further back you go, the closer you are to a common ancestor. You're walking backwards through common ancestors. But it does not necessarily have to do with proportionality through time. Okay, so for example, here I have two phylogenetic trees. Here is species A, represented by this line right here. Species B, represented by that line right there. Species A, again, right back there. And here is species C. What's the difference between these two phylogenetic trees, and what interpretations can we make from them? Both have species A, right? What happens to species A in this one that does not happen in this one?
The branch comes off of it, making species C.
Okay, so yes, we have species C. But what also happens to A? It cuts off. Doesn't appear. What can we look at from these two phylogenetic trees and maybe reasonably interpret could have happened here?
Species A could have died off on the bottom.
Gavin, what do you think?
Species C had a trait that species A didn't, so they continued.
And these two ideas are what happened, combined. Species A could not compete with both B and C. Up here, it did compete with B. It continued forward. But in competition with both B and C in this scenario, it could not compete. and therefore it died off because of traits acquired by B and C, probably the ones that made them branch off from A in the first place, that gave these two an advantage that A did not have. Okay? This is the sort of relationship that we see by studying phylogenetic trees. Here's a couple of different ways to look at it. A clade, by the way, is a grouping of organisms that share common traits. So C and D are nested inside of this unit, B, C, and D are nested inside of that unit, so on and so forth. I'll show you some examples of clades here in a minute. Okay, so clade, cluster of species containing common traits that stem from an ancestor. Okay, if I were to group a whole bunch of organisms by traits, this is a cladogram. Okay, I can only do that if they share a common ancestor within the bounds of my clade. So for example, I cannot group, oh, that's all right. All right, you cannot do that like this because these two right here don't have an ancestor shared with these ones until way back here. But that's outside of our clade, so that doesn't work. This works because all of these species share this common ancestor. Okay, so just remember that when we're looking at a clade. So a clade is a cluster of species sharing an ancestor, and a phylogeny is a group of organisms in which we are studying the relationships. Okay, here is a cladogram. I've made this cladogram of horses here. Well, I didn't make this one. I found this one. It was very nicely put together, so I grabbed it. So these are all the horses that we have. Okay, all the horses that have existed in the fossil record. Okay, that we know of anyway. Okay, I have grouped them, or they have been grouped by trait. For example, this clade right here, this brown one, molars tall, cement on all teeth. All of the horses in here have that trait. Fewer than 4 toes on front foot, many teeth shaped like molars. All of these are within that trait. And then all of the horses are inside of all of this. But this is how you would draw a clade. A very broad example might be if I were to look at all of the animals on Earth. Yeah, sure. And then say, I'm going to make a clade of all of the animals with jaws. Okay? That includes everything except jawless fishes. Okay, well now I want to make one of everyone that has lungs. So now amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. What about a clade that includes every animal with claws or nails? Reptiles, birds, and mammals. What about everything with mammary glands? Well, that's only going to be mammals, right? This is how you draw a cladogram, using shared traits. Let's talk about some of the misconceptions that I find a lot concerning evolution. The biggest one is that everything in nature over time goes from simple to complex. So life was simple to begin with, and now it is way more complicated. That is a massively hubristic way of thinking because we exist now. And that's a way of saying, oh, we are at the pinnacle of evolution because we exist now instead of 4 billion years ago. It's not a great way of thinking it, right? But also, if that were true, would we have bacteria now? No, we would not. We still have the, quote, simple forms of life that started here. Okay? So clearly it's not this great chain of being where we're gradually going from simple to complex over time. Okay? MRCA, by the way, stands for most recent common ancestor. If you study phylogenetic trees and identify most recent common ancestors, you see that it's not directly tied to progression through time because it is not uniform in the ways that life develops. All right. Another common thing to do is laterize. When you're laterizing, you tend to think, okay, A existed the furthest back, then B, then C, then D. Without thinking, all 4 of them could have existed at the same time, and probably did. It's just the way that we tend to think of this, okay? C could have existed at almost the same time that A showed up. It doesn't look like that on here, because this is just showing an evolutionary relationship, not a true time relationship to scale. So avoid that thinking. And then it's also a mistake saying that if species A has, or if group A has 2 species and group B has 40 species, there clearly was more of species or of group B, or they were more successful, or they lived the longest, or something like that. Just remember the fossil record is incomplete, okay? We are working with incomplete information, just the best that we can. So it's a mistake to assume something like that right off the bat. All right, taxonomy is the study of these groups of organisms and how we name them. If you look at this taxonomic tree, I want you to notice something about this. So this is actually a phylogenetic tree with various taxonomies on there, okay? I want you to notice something about this. There's a reason why I like this particular one. Pretty much every other phylogenetic tree that you will look at has mammals at the top. Why? Mammals made the tree. We drew it. Somebody drew it. Some mammal drew it. A human drew it. And naturally, most people consider us to be at the top of the food chain. So there we sit on our throne. Okay? I like this one because it puts us in there as in the group of animals, right? Without considering us as a sitting on that throne at the top of the chain. Okay? So here we sit over here. And we can see the relationship, the evolutionary relationship through all these organisms over time. Look at this. Bacteria and archaea split off early. Then we've got this black group right here, which goes into things like algae and plants, and then our planktonic animals here. And then the other side of that, we've got slime and molds, fungi, and animals. We have more in common with a slime than we do with plants. I should say a slime has more in common with us than they do with a plant. Interesting. Okay, let's start off by talking about prokaryotes. Prokaryotes are single-celled organisms. Eukaryotes are multi-celled organisms. There you go. Bacteria and archaea represent most of the single-celled organisms. And then almost everything else in here is a multi-celled organism. Multi-celled organisms came about through a certain process that I'll explore with you here in a bit. Really quick, how we distinguish taxonomies from each other follows this order. Domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, suborder, superfamily, family, subfamily, genus, and species. Okay? There are various monikers or mnemonics, I should say, for how you can remember that. It's not really relevant right now. What you need to know about, though, are the genus and species. Genus is always italicized, and species always italicized. Okay? Well, hi. Oh, sure, yeah, thank you. Capitalize the genus, don't capitalize the species. Okay? So we belong to the domain Eukarya. What does that mean? We're multi-celled organisms. Kingdom Animalia. What does that mean? We are animals. Phylum Chordata. What does that mean? What is a chordate? Yeah, someone that has a spine. Okay, you got that spinal cord. Class Mammalia. We are mammals. Good. Order Primates. No, but we are primates, just like apes, chimpanzees, gorillas, all of that. We've got fingers, yes. We've got all this stuff, okay? There's a lot that goes into being a primate. We are part of the suborder Anthropoidea, meaning we walk on 2 feet. Hominoidea, Hominidae, Homininae, that has reference to the size of our skull, okay? And then Homo and then Homo sapiens are a genus and species. We put a lot of stock into the size of our brains. You know that? You ever heard the mistaken belief that our brain-to-body ratio is what makes us the smartest thing on the planet? That's not true. Do you know what has the largest brain on the planet?
A whale.
Blue whale. Well done. It's the largest animal on the planet, has the largest brain. Brain to body ratio is pretty small. Ours is much bigger. Okay, well then brain to body ratio. What animal has the largest brain to body ratio on the planet? Huh? Yeah, you remember when I talked about this before. It's an ant. If aliens were as obsessed with the brain to body ratio as we are, they would come to Earth and they would talk to the ants before they talk to us. Yeah, because ants have a much larger brain to body ratio than we do. So if that's the measure for intelligence, aliens would go talk to them and ignore us. Hopefully they're not as closed-minded about it as we are. Okay? All right, let's start talking about prokaryotes. Prokaryotes are separated into producers and consumers. Producers are those who, by photosynthesis or chemosynthesis, generate energy. Okay? The consumers eat the producers and then get their energy that way. You and I, we are consumers. We eat the things. We eat the salad. We eat the cows that eat the producers. Okay? We eat the stuff, and therefore we are consumers. But we are not prokaryotes. We are eukaryotes. Okay? The prokaryotes have a 3.5 billion year old fossil record. Stromatolites, made out of prokaryotic cells. Okay? Archaea and bacteria represent most of the prokaryotes that developed on our world. So now let's talk about eukaryotes. So prokaryotes existed for about 3.5 billion years, and they are the ones that made our atmosphere what it is now. Eukaryotes showed up a while after that and set the stage for the rest of us to show up. Yeah, sure. Okay. Multicelled organisms like you and me. Eukaryotes came from this. Starting off, we've got protists. Protists are microscopic, essentially shells or structures made out of often silica, okay, with multiple cells inside of a network of that structure that work together towards a common goal. You and I are collections of trillions of cells working together toward a common goal. These were not trillions of cells, right? It started off with 2, and then it went to a dozen, and then it went to a couple of dozen, and then hundreds. And over time, the networks got a little more extensive, leading up to the measure of where we are now, where we have things like tigers and blue whales and lizards and all of these things that are trillions of cells working together. We have fossil records of all of this progression through time through the thick layers of limestone and chert that we can see from these rocks dating all the way back to then. Then we see the development of green algae and plants, and don't worry, I'm going to talk all about this later on. Module 2 is actually all about the progression going through the geologic timescale when all of these things show up in the fossil record. I'm skimming through it right now because I'm just trying to show you the quality or the quantity of the different forms of life we have that have developed through time. So green algae was the ancestor to plants. We get algae. That algae becomes vascular and non-vascular plants, meaning that vascular meaning that it pumps water through its body like you and I with a heart. But plants don't have hearts. They use processes called xylem and phloem to pump the water in and out. Vascular plants turn into seeded plants. Those seeded plants turn into all of the wondrous different types and variety of plants we have on the world right now. How did this happen? This is a process called endosymbiosis. Yeah, sure. So a consuming cell consumed a producer cell, but apparently had some kind of adaptation, some kind of mutation. So instead of eating it, it started using it. Yeah. This producer cell started feeding energy into the consumer cell, and the consumer cell did not consume it. This was symbiotic relationship, and this is what set the stage for the first plants. Okay. Plants have tissues. You and I have tissues. Tissues are substances through which water and other substances can be transferred through. We have muscle tissue, skin tissue, sinus tissue, all of these tissues that allow the transport of fluid through itself as part of body processes. Yep, we talked about that. All right, plants. for the longest time, plants were only gymnosperms. Angiosperms, which include flowering plants, did not show up until actually pretty late into the dinosaur time period. There were no flowers on Earth until almost the time when dinosaurs went extinct. Interesting to think about that, huh? I had a student in a class a few years back who thought that was just the saddest thing. She was like, all those dinosaurs that lived and never got to give their girlfriends flowers. I was like, you know what? You're right. That is pretty sad. So gymnosperms are the ones that spread their seeds through cones. Christmas trees, for example, conifers, okay, are coning plants. They grow their seeds in cones. The cones dry out, open up, drop the seeds to the ground. The seeds then grow into new trees. Angiosperms, which came later, are the flowering plants. They grow their seeds in a flower or a fruit. And then those fall to the ground and spread the seeds that way. The difference being angiosperms go through this process of double fertilization, where they fertilize a seed, but they also fertilize the fruit around that seed. Think of an apple. What is the purpose of the flesh around an apple? You and I eat it. It's to protect it and give it its first burst of nutrition when it falls to the ground. That apple falls to the ground. That tree's intention is for that apple, the tissues, to provide the nutrition needed for that seed to have a head start in growing. You and I, we eat it. Essentially, when you're eating an apple or any other fruit, you're basically eating a tree egg. Okay? Fruit are basically tree eggs.
So if we take an apple from a grocery store, don't eat it, just put it in the ground and throw it away.
I mean, yeah, I would. Well, okay, that depends on if it's been genetically modified. We know how to modify the genes of organisms to prevent them from growing into fully grown adults. We do that all the time. I'll talk about that more later. All right, then we've got fungi, things like mushrooms. These are, obviously they're consumers, but they are detrivores, okay? They consume decaying matter, be that flesh or plant, okay? They consume animal and plant matter equally, okay? They spread by spore, which is actually the method of reproductive spreading that occurred long before we ever had seeds. I'll talk about more of that later in the class. Then we've got our animals. Our animals are separated into vertebrates and invertebrates. Vertebrates being those with a backbone, invertebrates those without a backbone. Chordates, by the way. That's what chordates and vertebrates, you can consider them in the same category here, okay? So these, chordates, everything else, non-chordates or invertebrates. Let's talk about some of the invertebrates. Sponges. Sponges have been around for a very long time. As a matter of fact, some of the first reef systems in the ocean were made by sponges. We'll talk about that when we discuss the timeline of life on Earth in the geologic timescale in Module 3. They are suspension feeders, which means that they need the water to bring food to them. They stay in one spot. Sponges are colonies of many cells, each of which performs a different function. Some catch food, some digest food, some expel waste. But they all work together as part of this colonial system, this eukaryotic organism, toward the betterment of the whole group of them. Okay? Cnidarians. I know it starts with a C. That C is silent. These are pronounced cnidarians. This includes jellyfish and coral. They are also suspension feeders, with the difference being coral are locked in place. They have to wait for the food to come to them. Jellyfish hang out actually in the water column itself. They are still suspension feeders. Their tentacles hang out in the water, catching food. I've had many, many jellyfish try to eat me in the past, right? I've been stung by jellyfish on 6 different occasions. What is that stinging doing? They don't know I'm too big to eat. The tentacles wrap around you. They sting you to try and stun you they pump toxins into you. If I were a fish, it would have worked. As it just was incredibly painful. Yeah, so they stun their food, and then they pull them up towards the body, and then digest them slowly. So they're the same thing in the same group as a coral. Very different animals, but in the same group of Cnidaria. Mollusks. So this includes everything from snails to octopi to squid, ammonoids and nautiloids, which we will talk about, bivalves, brachiopods. These are all different organisms we're going to learn more about. But mollusks have gills and generally travel through the use of various, well, okay, so in the case of snails, they've got feet. You guys know that snails have a foot? They have 1 foot. Right here. Yeah, that fleshy pad on the bottom of their body, we call that their foot. That's how they travel. Teeth? Some snails have drilling devices. I don't know that I would call them teeth, though. They can pierce through shells to eat what's inside. Starfish have the same thing. Sure, call it a tooth if you like. Okay, but there's a whole bunch of groups of animals within mollusks. So yeah, squid and octopi are in the same group as snails in Mollusca, is the group that they're in. Bryozoans look very similar to coral. It's very difficult to tell them apart from coral, except when you're looking at the animal itself. They build very similar structures. It's the animal itself that looks very different, which means that it can be hard to look at a fossil of a bryozoan and not see it as a coral. We know they're very different because we see the way that they look today. We'll talk more about that later on. But they often fill the same coral reef systems and ecological niches as sponges. So we find them in tandem with each other a lot. All right, arthropods. These include crustaceans, so your crabs and lobsters, as well as insects. Okay, so your scorpions and all of that. They are arthropods. They have exoskeletons that are segmented. Trilobites look like this. They are extinct. I have a few real fossils of them over there. They had 3 lobes to their body, hence the name trilobite. And these are often used as index fossils because of how widespread they were across the planet. Okay. Insects and crustaceans, they also fall in this group. They are descendants of animals like arthropods, or of trilobites, I mean. Echinoderms. These include sea stars, formerly known as starfish. People have more recently started calling them sea stars because they aren't actually fish. It's a misnomer. So sea stars they are. Sea urchins also are echinoderms, as are sand dollars. Crinoids, also known as sea lilies, look like this. Now, you've heard the term crinoid from me before. They have a very long fossil record. I have a lot of fossils of crinoids. They used to have to stick in one spot. They were basically flowers. They would attach somewhere and then grow in that one spot and kind of just sit there and catch food out of the water. Okay? Like a flower. However, evolution, mutation, cool advantage, a mutation occurred in which they could detach from the ground and then use those arms that they used to catch food to swim through the water like this. Crinoids can swim now, which is really cool. They couldn't do that in the fossil record, but they can now. Graptolites are extinct, but are also very important index fossils that we will learn about later. Then we've got chordates, animals with a spinal cord, okay? Starting off with fish that looked very much like an eel hundreds and hundreds of millions of years ago. And now going to now, the history of notochords has turned into spinal cords and then rigid backbones. And here we are. This includes everything from fish to amphibians, reptiles, dinosaurs, birds, and then you and me. We all fit into this category. Now, there are 3 types of mammals. Placentals, that's you and me. When an embryo grows inside of a mother, a placenta grows with that embryo. That placenta is essentially a nutrition sac that the baby uses to grow. The mother passes blood into the placenta. The placenta passes that blood into the child. It's an intermediary. That's what a placental mammal does. Then we've got marsupials. Marsupials grow the baby in the womb until it reaches a certain stage. And then that baby leaves the womb and goes into a pouch. This is what kangaroos do, wombats, Tasmanian devils. Okay? Any marsupial gives birth to a tiny little baby. Like kangaroo babies are like the size of a grain of rice or something like that. And then they go and they live in the mother's external sac on her stomach, okay, her pouch. And that's where they finish growing for the rest of their development. Then you've got monotremes. Monotremes are mammals that lay eggs. A platypus, yeah. Platypus are monotremes, as are echidnas, okay? There are not very many monotremes left on our planet. They are evolutionary holdouts, I guess you could say, okay? What do you mean? Yes, so think of it like this. Mammals diverged, evolutionarily speaking, from reptiles hundreds of millions of years ago. We'll talk about that. But what that means is all of the early mammals still laid eggs. Mutations for giving birth to live young instead of laying eggs came later. Monotremes are descendants of mammals that never lost the ability to lay eggs. You and I are the descendants of mammals that started giving birth to live young. Okay? That's why there's more of us than the egg-laying kind. So much time has passed. Okay? All right, any questions about this lecture? Okay, that's my lecture on the diversity of life. I know it was very broad. We will zoom in on all of these different subjects as we move through the rest of the course. Lab 3 is technically assigned, but I have given it several weeks before it's due because you're not going to get all the information you need for it until we have 1 or 2 more lectures, okay? So you can start working on it now if you like. You actually have the Lab 3 PowerPoint that gives you most of the information you need, okay? It gives you some more details about all of this. But we'll dive more into the subjects of these different animals more over the coming weeks, okay? No questions? Everyone feels good? All right. Well, we've got an hour left for lab time, so I'm going to end the recording here and we can start on that.